Good morning, everybody. It's 9 o'clock, and 9 o'clock is with me, Father Warner. We are in the 15th week in Ordinary Time. We continue to study the first part of the prophet Isaiah, that's Proto-Isaiah, chapters 1 to 39. And this week, right up till Friday, we will be taking significant texts that will help us understand the prophecy and the mind of the prophet Isaiah, and even the mind of God, if we may dare say that. We can never know the mind of God, but the way God communicated through the prophet Isaiah with regard to the ministry of Isaiah. We are looking at chapter 26, and today we are going to look at verses 7 to 9, then we will go to verse 12, then verse 16 to verse 19. Now, I have entitled today's teaching Breaking Wind. Yes, you heard that right. Breaking wind is a very polite word for saying a colloquial word like fart. But believe it or not, that's exactly what you're going to hear in today's text. And I hope it brings a smile on your face and a thought in your heart, because God is going to say what sounds very funny and perhaps a little embarrassing to his people. So listen to this. The way of the righteous is level. O just one, you make smooth the path of the righteous. In the path of your judgments, O Lord, we wait for you. Your name and your renown are my soul's desire. My soul yearns for you in the night. Now verse 12. O Lord, you will ordain peace for us, for indeed all that we have done, you have done for us. Verse 16 onwards. O Lord, in my distress they sought you, they poured out a prayer. When your chastening was on them, like a woman with child who reads and cries out in her pangs when she is near her time, so were we because of you, O Lord. We were with child, we wreathed, but we gave birth only to wind. We have won no victories on earth, and no one is born to inhabit the world. Your dead shall live, their corpses shall rise. O dwellers in the dust, awake and sing for joy, for your dew is a radiant dew, and the earth will give birth to those long dead. The word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Now, I would recommend, as I often do, that you read the entire chapter 26, because chapter 26 of the prophet Isaiah also gives us those beautiful lines in verse 3. He will keep you in perfect peace, not the RSV translation, but he will keep those in perfect peace whose mind is stayed on him. Taken from verse 3. Our RSV doesn't say perfect peace, but many other translations will use that word perfect peace, which translates in Hebrew as shalom, shalom. But read the entire of chapter 26. Now, let's put this a little bit in perspective. The prophet Isaiah foresaw that Assyria would one day be replaced by a new emerging power. We know that emerging power to be the Babylonian Empire. Babylon was a nation far more destructive than Assyria was, and it was they who would attack Jerusalem and eventually succeed in destroying it. Now, this is taken up in our Bibles in Isaiah in chapters 13 all the way down to chapter 27, with its climax being in chapter 39, which will speak of the fall of Jerusalem, and then chapter 40 onwards will be a text that we'll hear in the season of Advent. So chapters 13 to 27, when you look at it, also has a large collection of poems, and these poems also express God's judgment. Also, it expresses God's hope for the nation of Israel, Judah, and for all the nations. Now, In chapters 13 to 27, as I said, we will already learn of the fall of Babylon. You might say, Father, you just spoke of chapter 39, the fall of Jerusalem in the hands of Babylon, but you will already hear in chapters 13 to 27 of the fall of Babylon at a later stage. And you will also hear of prophecies of the fall of all of Israel's neighbors. So, what often happens, as in this text, we go from speaking in the first person to the third person, back to the first person to the third person, and these texts tend to be a bit confusing. Chapter 26 is a classic example of this shift between the first and the third person. So, sometimes God is speaking, sometimes God is speaking of somebody. Yeah. So, the kings of Babylon claimed that they were higher than all other gods. We saw this even in yesterday's readings that we did. The Babylonian claim, yesterday we saw the Assyrian claim of being boastful. God had simply used them as his rod, as he says, I have used you as my rod of anger. I used you to punish my own people, but now you, Assyria, have begun to think that you are so great, you are greater than everybody else. Babylon also made that claim that they were higher than all other gods. And so Yahweh vows to destroy Babylon and all of Israel's neighbors who practiced the same kind of pride, the same kind of injustice. Remember, the book of Amos and the book of Isaiah are prophets who deal also with the issue of justice, and so will Micah. You'll see this on Saturday when we do a text from the second chapter of Micah talking about social injustice. So you'll see that it talks about our pride, it talks about injustice, it talks about also issues of faith. Now, Isaiah predicts the ultimate ruin of the Babylonian. But in the book of Isaiah, God's judgment is never the final words for his people. Now, chapter 24 to chapter 27, in which our text falls, is called by many scholars the little apocalypse of Isaiah, because these chapters deal with the future theme. That's why we call it apocalyptic, a future apocalyptic theme. Now, the prophets, when you look at their lives and their prophecy, often did this, speak of things that were to happen, apocalyptic themes. They would talk about an immediate event that is going on around them, but they used that event as that immediate event that was going on. They used that as a model of something that would be fulfilled to a greater extent in the future. So it is like putting on some kind of prophetic bifocals, You see something close with your bifocals, but you can also use that to see something much further away. That's exactly what the prophets were doing, looking at the present scenario, but also looking at what was going to happen in the future. Now, chapter 26 of the prophet Isaiah is the third of 4 chapters that describe God's victory over his enemies. And these enemies include the people of Babylon. It is the day of God's ultimate triumph, the day when God will reign over Israel and over the whole world. And so this section that we are looking at describes the song, this chapter in particular, describes the song that Jerusalem will sing on that day. Let me say this again so that you understand this. Chapter 26, if you look at the title, it says Judah's Song of Victory. So this chapter describes the song that Jerusalem will sing on that day of victory, that day when God will be victorious over all the nations and he will establish himself once again in Jerusalem. It's going to be a song of salvation when all the enemies have been defeated. So our text of today talks of some elements in that joyful song that will be sung in the land of Judah, because God has come now to reign. Now, our text covers only certain parts of chapter 26. We are doing verses 7 to 9, we are doing verse 12, and then we are doing verse 16 to 19. But I recommend, as I often do, that you read the entire chapter, because I'm going to make some references, as I already did at the start of this teaching, to other parts of chapter 26 which are not in our text. Now, that was just the introduction. Okay, sometimes you might say, my gosh, Father, that introduction was very difficult to understand. Please, you need, those of you who are doing the prophet Isaiah, next week the prophet Micah, the prophet Amos or Hosea, please don't think that these are nice, happy thoughts that I'm giving you. I am breaking the word for you so that you can understand it, and therefore you very often need to listen to this again for the second time. The first time sounds very heavy. This is not meant to be, as I said, some happy thought, Christian thought to keep you going. This is something so that you can study God's word, nourish it, and then in some way also, especially many Sunday school teachers have been writing to me saying, Father, we teach the prophets, we have no clue what we are teaching, and this truly helps us. So now I'm going to look at chapter 26, and I'm not going to limit myself to verses 7 to 8 and 12. I'm going to look at a few more verses. Now, verse 1 straight away kicks off this song of praise. On that day, this song of praise will be sung in the land of Judah. So, Jerusalem, we are told straight away in verse 1, we have a strong city. Jerusalem will be that strong city. It's going to be unlike the old Jerusalem. The old Jerusalem was ravaged by wars and attacks from the Assyrians, from the Babylonians. The new Jerusalem, we are told, will have strong walls, and it will have an imposing army. See, it says, he sets up victory like walls and bulwarks. Bulwarks referring to the armies. Now, interestingly, verse 2 says, open the gates. Verse 1 says, we are going to set up strong walls. Verse 2 says, open the gates. Now, while the walls will keep away the unwanted and keep them away, it is the gates that will be open for the righteous to enter. What a lovely concept. God is going to defend his city with strong walls, but the gates are going to be open for the righteous. Now, the righteous who will be welcomed in its gates are those who have kept the faith. If you and I have kept the faith, God says, in that new Jerusalem, my gates will be open for you. And the concept of gates is not new. Jesus himself spoke of that gate through which the sheep enter, the narrow gate. Okay? So those who have kept the faith will be welcomed, as opposed to those who have compromised the faith. And I'm using this word compromised very strongly, because there are people who are compromising with the faith, and they wear it as a badge of honor of a secular Christianity. There is no such thing as this being a secular Christian. A Christian itself has its doctrines and dogmas. You know, I must tell you, just before I walked in to the teaching, Father Clarence today gave me, I don't know, he must be thinking I can read Latin and Spanish, but he gave me the magisterium of the church. I'm reading the translation from the cover, and I was quite surprised. It starts with from the earliest popes, from the earliest councils, yeah, and it goes all the way to John Paul II, yeah, from 417. Now I'm flipping pages. 352 from the first council of Nicaea. This is the teaching of the church. This is the magisterium. You decide to compromise on this, well, good luck to you. Yeah? I'm not asking you to study this, but I'm saying you can't have your own brand of Christianity. And many Catholics today are asking for this, my own brand of Christianity. You can't. You're either in or you're out. Figure out where you are. So it is this city, this new Jerusalem, that God will grant those of steadfast mind. Yeah, look at verse 3. Those of steadfast mind you keep in peace. So God will grant those of steadfast mind this city, those who have been faithful. And what does he grant them? He gives them the gift of perfect peace. Those of steadfast mind you keep in peace because they trust in you. Perfect peace. You know, I've said this before. The translation of the word peace is shalom. Peace is not the absence. Shalom is not the absence of something, the absence of war. I once read somewhere, A cemetery is the absence of war. It's the absence of disturbance. But that's not what God wants to, that's not the kind of peace God wants to give us. Peace is not the absence of something. Listen to this. Peace is not the absence, it is the presence of something. When you tell somebody in church, peace I give you, you're not saying, I hope you have no trouble. You're saying, in the midst of your troubles, I'm giving you Jesus. It's the presence of something. God's definition of peace is the presence of God in the midst of our conflict. And this is the meaning of shalom. And God says, I don't only want to give you peace, I want to give you perfect peace. Shalom, shalom. Shalom, my friend. Shalom, my friend. Shalom, shalom. Perfect peace. That's what God keeps us. He will keep us in perfect peace whose mind has stayed on Him, who has trusted in Him. Now, the text of today also tells us that in this New Jerusalem, His righteous people will walk in uprightness, and that is verse 7 onwards. You see, Isaiah accurately gives the sense of order in all of this. The Lord makes His people just first by a relationship of faith and trust in Him. Then they walk in the way of uprightness. It's not the other way around. You can't walk in uprightness unless you share a deep relationship with God. When we walk in uprightness, then we are able to serve God in the way that God demands our service. But if you look at our text, the Lord also looks at His righteous ones and He evaluates their paths. He makes those paths smooth. Verse 7, the way of the righteous is level, O just one, you make smooth the path of the righteous. Because He cares about the walk of His just ones. You know, it's so wonderful to see how much God cares for us when we serve Him in righteousness. He cares enough to be bothered to make our path smooth. Making our path smooth, my dear friends, does not mean taking away the obstacles in our lives, as I said in the case of shalom. Making our path smooth means that when we reach our destination, we will realize that it was worth it. That's what it means. But we will have to be faithful to that path. For only the path of fidelity, only in the path of fidelity can we find the Lord. Yet, Isaiah also warns the New Jerusalem. Isaiah warns the New Jerusalem of the futility of its old ways. You know, the nation of Judah, with Jerusalem as its capital, Judah, very often like us, turned to God only in the time of calamity. Verse 16, O Lord, in distress they sought you, they poured out their prayers. They, like us, pour out our prayers to God when we feel that God has punished us for straying away from His righteous paths. You know, we must understand God's mind in punishing His people and sending them into exile. You see, when a child is punished, what is the object lesson? The object lesson is not to remove the child from the parent. The object lesson is to draw the child closer to the parent. And when God punishes, it's not that He is driving us away from Him. He's drawing us to Him. So while this is a song of praise, as I said, chapter 26, Judah's song of victory, it is also a song of remembrance of what Judah failed to become, a holy nation, or what we can fail to become, a holy nation, a holy people, a people set apart. That's what holiness means. Hagios in Greek means to be set apart. We can fail to remember that God set us apart. And Judah suffered much due to the exile. But the point being made here is that suffering should also have, and you'll see this, our suffering should have some positive result, and which brings us to our funny verse which I spoke of, breaking wind. Verse 17, if you read, let me read it to you first. Like a woman with child who wreathes and cries out in her pangs when she is near her time, so were we because of you, O Lord. We were with child, verse 18, we wreathed, but we gave birth only to wind. In short, they're saying we only ended up releasing some gas, we never gave birth to a child. So verse 17 compares Judah's sufferings to the childbirth pangs of a woman in labor. While their suffering was agonizing, they suffered in exile. The people of Judah suffered. While they suffered in agonizing, it did not bring about a child. It brought about bad gas. Yeah, as I said earlier, some of you might be saying, Father, did you really talk about gas and farting in a spiritual talk? Yes, I did. God says to them, your suffering gave birth to wind, or in other words, as we say, you just broke wind. This suffering, and this is the point that God is making, this suffering of being sent into exile, of being punished, says God, was for nothing. You suffered for nothing. Why are you simply going against me, says God? Because then I have to impose, as it were, that corrective suffering for you to come back to me, not to be driven away from me. And that suffering was needless. A woman who had a baby suffered for something. That is a suffering that is worth suffering for. But Judah suffered in captivity and suffered for nothing. So this is really, God is telling Judah, this is your time out. And while it is agonizing in your time out period, there will be no silver lining. Don't think that God is going to smile at you and say, okay, time out, come back from that corner. God is simply telling Judah that they suffered needlessly, and now He's saying, please don't do that again. Don't turn against me, and you won't suffer for nothing. So the final word is always a word of hope, and that's what we will see even when God is so angry with us. You know, God today in the final verses, verse 19 onwards, God pictures Judah as His nation which is dead. Verse 19, your dead shall live, their corpses shall rise. He pictures Judah as a nation which is dead, but it will live again. The suffering of Judah, we are told, is only for a time. Some of the remnant will live. They will live again in the new Jerusalem. O dwellers in the dust, awake and sing for joy, for your dew is as radiant dew, and the earth will give birth to those long dead. I want to pray today for my godchild, Tiara. I have not been in touch with her for quite a while, but she lives in America. But Tiara, many, many happy returns of the day, and I call her my godchild in a way. She's not my godchild, but her sister is my godchild, but I consider both of them, Tiara and Michelle, my godchildren. God bless you. Keep well, and to your parents, Sandra and Agnello, may the Lord continue to bless them both. Thank you, everybody. We continue our teaching tomorrow, and we will finish the prophet Isaiah tomorrow. On Saturday, we begin the prophet Micah, and we'll study the prophet Micah on Saturday, Monday, Tuesday, and then we will begin, I think, the prophet Jeremiah. So we are doing all of prophecy rather quickly, but we are at least touching a rather difficult books which normally we will tend not to study. Thank you to all our donors, to the Love, Joy, Hope Foundation, also to those who continue to care for St. Stephen's Table. God bless you. Have a lovely day, and I'll see you again tomorrow at 9 o'clock with Father Warner.